This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, inside the mind of Putin. With us this evening, Clare Lopez, the founder and president of Lopez Liberty LLC. She was a career operations officer with the CIA, and she publishes widely as a strategic policy and intelligence expert. Clare Lopez, what an honor to have you back on the Glazov Gang.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm very glad to be back with you.
Fantastic. And Clare, a very important time to have an expert like you on who knows a lot about Vladimir Putin and the dynamics going on in Russia and Ukraine. Why don't we just begin in general? You've published some fascinating work recently on all of this. Let's begin in general. What is Putin doing and why is he doing it?
Well, thanks for referring to the article that I published about 5-6 weeks ago at American Greatness. And it's called, "It's Not NATO Putin Fears, It's Western Style Nationalism." And in the piece, I write about at least my perspective of what is going on with Putin. And I think he is a complex figure. I think that he has a lot of background from various different places in Russian history. Let's put it that way. He has a namesake, Vladimir of Rus, who in the year 988 converted to Christianity and brought the whole people with him. And in those days, that's how that was done. Now, the Russian Orthodox Christianity, as you well know, Jamie, is not the same kind of practice that you might see from your friendly Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian friends down the street. It is steeped in a different kind of background. It is of the blood and of the soil. It is of Chekhov and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. And as far as Vladimir of Rus goes, and our present day Vladimir Putin, it is about conquest and domination and subjugation. And so rolling all of that in together with Putin's own personal background, baptized Christian by his Christian mother, but then, raised in a milieu steeped in this kind of history, and then, of course, overlaid with his career as a KGB agent, during which he believes, he has said that the biggest catastrophe of his lifetime when he was with the KGB was the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union. And I think the Soviet Union broke up, but I think the KGB never skipped a beat. Of course, its successors are now the FSB and the SVR and so forth. But for Putin, I think that he sees it as his mission in life. And he's approaching 70 years old now, I believe. His mission in life is to somehow recreate, put back together the lost Soviet Union, to put back together even the lost Russian Empire. And then we think about Ukraine and Kiev, which was the cradle of Russian civilization, in fact, although Ukrainians are, as a people, a much older national identity even than Russians. And then think about the name of the country. You know this, I'm sure, Jamie. Ukrainian language and Russian language are close. They're not the same, but they're close as Slavic languages. The name of the country, Ukraine, is two words, Ukraina. U means at. Kraina means something like the farthest outpost or the farthest border of what? Of the Russian Empire, is the way Putin thinks about it. But that's not the way Ukrainians are thinking about it today.
Thank you so much, Claire. So much to unravel here. So we'll try to go to a couple pieces of the puzzle and then try to put some of them together at the end of the show. So let's just go back for a minute. Thank you so much for your wise and informative summary for us to begin this discussion. It's quite a bit to unravel because we got a guy posing as a Christian and yet the KGB is involved. So, you know, all of this is very twisted. So, look, there's an official image, an official background that Putin likes to have. And as we also know, you know, my family studies a lot of this. Scholars that I know I'm in touch with, I've been studying this. Almost all of Putin's background, including this baptism with his mom and his Orthodox Christianity, a lot of this is made up and it's all BS. And this is why a lot of people have gotten killed. Litvinenko, Father Alexander, men, people who knew a lot about him on different degrees, people getting killed. But let's just stick with this official image that you are very accurately discussing. And definitely Putin, and who knows what's in his mind, how deluded he is, how he sees himself. But definitely, as you're saying, this Russian Orthodox Christianity that he's supposedly representing. Let me ask this. So you've got this KGB guy that's seeing himself or trying to pose or whatever the dysfunctionality is there in his twisted imagination, is this Christian. And somewhere there's this aura and understanding among many people, including in the West, that the West is you know, obviously declining in morality. You've got the LGBTQ movements, you've got the transgender movements. The West is falling apart morally, as you've also written about very intelligently and profoundly. And somewhere, perhaps Putin has created this vision of himself as fighting against the immorality of the West. But there's also a lot of Westerners that have bought into this, that somehow Putin is representing this moral crusade against the, you know, the declining morality of the West. And yet this is a KGB SOB that is a mass murderer and is no Christian at all. It's all very muddy, isn't it?
Yes, it sure is. And, you know, let's remember the Russian Orthodox Church long ago was totally and completely co-opted by the KGB, or really its predecessors, NKVD, Cheka. It's not an independent church entity, if you will. And even in its overseas representations, the Russian Orthodox Church is still bound by ties back to the Kremlin. So understanding that maybe helps put that in perspective a little bit. Certainly Putin and others probably in his top echelons around him look at the West right now with justification as morally degraded and certainly weak. In particular, I think looking at current leadership in Washington, D.C., but also in Western Europe, let's say, too. And he sees an opportunity there. It's an opportunity to spin the narrative, as you rightly put it, Jamie, the narrative that he, Putin, is somehow a champion of Christian morality, you know, even as he's bombing entire cities, residential apartment blocks, women and children to smithereens.
And then blaming it on the Chechens.
I'm sorry, say again?
Well, oh, excuse me. You're referring to his bombing in Ukraine, right?
Ukraine, while he's doing all of that, but you're absolutely right. This is of a pattern with
Yeah.
what he's done before to the city of Grozny in Chechnya, to Aleppo in Syrian battlefields. Absolutely, disregard for human life entirely.
Yeah, no, Claire. Oh, absolutely, Claire. I was also saying that this monster also, as it turns out from many sources, including Litvinenko and other sources, the KGB with Putin, and Putin was leading all this. They're bombing apartments in Russia and then blaming it on the Chechens. So there's monstrosity here all over the place.
Even to their own people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's exactly the pretext that Putin used. His own security forces bombed that apartment building in Russia in order to serve as a pretext for him to go into Chechnya and bomb Grozny to the ground. Yes.
So Claire, it's hard to know often what to think these days on many levels, because in the past, when we talked about the West, America, there was, it was Ronald Reagan and the free world. And today the leadership in the quote unquote West is Biden, Trudeau up north, Klaus Schwab and Soros and Gates and Fauci, the deep state, the globalists. This is why there's a confusion now. We've got our own conservative camp that's splintered because some in the conservative camp believe that somewhere all the hopes that they had for Trump in taking on the globalists and the evil left that took over the West and in the United States, they somehow see Putin as the man continuing Trump's battle, that he's now taking on Schwab, he's taking on Soros. But this is very twisted, because if the deep state and globalists are anything, they're also communist. At the same time, there's definitely a conflict of interest between Putin and China and the globalists on some level, just as the Nazis and the Stalinists once hated each other. This is all quite blurry, right?
It sure is. But here's what I would say for folks who are trying to, put this all in perspective. The cause, or, the issue at hand, which is a war of aggression launched by Putin and Russia against the free and independent sovereign nation state of Ukraine, that is a separate thing from those people or groups that may approve or disapprove of that. What I'm saying is, for example, if, I don't know, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, and Vladimir Putin all went outside and said, the sky is blue. Well, whether the sky is blue or not, or gray and overcast, is objective reality, has nothing to do with whether these nefarious characters rightly or wrongly call the color of the sky. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, if Putin says 2 + 2 is 4, we're not going to say it's 5 just because he's an evil guy. Right?
That's what I mean. So separate these things apart. Sometimes nefarious characters can be right about assessing an objective reality like the color of the sky.
Well, absolutely. Well, Claire, here's the thing, that after these SOBs trying to shut us down for 2 years, trying to lock us up, trying to put face diapers on us, trying to inject us with these evil serums, now all of a sudden they put a Ukrainian flag in our hand and say, it's okay, start waving it, pro-Ukraine. So I get a bit suspicious. If Klaus Schwab and George Soros and Hillary Clinton and these people want me to cheer on Ukraine, and that's the version, I get suspicious. At the same time, as you're saying, this does not mean that Ukrainian people do not have the right to be free if they want to be free and independent. It does not mean that Putin is not committing monstrous atrocities against the Ukrainian people. Absolutely. So these things exist a little bit side by side. So Claire, where I want to get to here is, So many lies, as we're saying. So there's all these complexities of the KGB, as we know, and as you've talked about the Russian Orthodox Church. We know that every leader in the Russian Orthodox Church, every high-ranking priest or, their leadership, this is all KGB, etc., etc. So there's so many lies, so much window dressing. But I think that one thing is not a lie. When Putin has made it clear that one of the greatest catastrophes of his life is the breakup of the USSR in 1991, I think that that's one of the sincere things he says. And would it be fair to say that what he's doing in Ukraine today is very much connected to his desire to build the Soviet Union back up?
Yes, I definitely agree with you there. And so when we're talking about globalists or those who champion national sovereignty and sovereign borders, we have to adjust our thinking, because those championing the independent sovereign nation state of the Westphalian system dating back to the 1600s, that is the global world order that we have all grown up in and come to know. Independent nation states with sovereign borders around them. But it is Putin, it is Xi, it is the mullahs of Iran, who on the other side are hearkening back to an earlier time, as we spoke about, of the Tsars, even of the Khans, right? And wanting to expand empire through conquest and domination. They are the ones violating the nation state system of the current global world order. They are the ones seeking to reestablish empire. In Putin's case, I think you're exactly right, trying as hard as he can to reestablish whatever borders or at a minimum sphere of influence that he can around Russia as it was in the past with the Russian Empire, because that's all you can call it, a Russian Empire, the USSR. And so we even see in some of the most recent military moves by the Russian military, having given up on conquering, taking over the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, Russian forces have now moved back towards the east, towards the Donbas region, that strip of the two oblasts of Donetsk and Luhansk that border up against Russia. But not just there, curving around, if you can picture the geography, to the south, along the Sea of Azov, where they've been pounding Mariupol to smithereens. But what's the most recent move they've made? And I want to quote here from a Russian general who spoke just a few days ago, about a week ago maybe. This is acting commander of Russia's Central Military District. He is Brigadier General Rustam Minikeyev. And he openly, publicly announced Russian plans to make passage, that's a translation, but make passage into the eastern part of Moldova. And again, if we can picture the geography, Moldova lies to the west of Ukraine, and its eastern strip is a separatist strip called Transnistria. And it is within that strip that separatists are seeking to join Russia, to be taken over and administered by Russia. That is what this general in his statement was talking about. And what do we see? Just in the last couple of days now, we see explosions inside of the Transnistria area. No casualties yet, at least that I know of, but perhaps false flag kind of explosive attacks that could be blamed somehow, on Moldova, which is not, like Ukraine also, is not a member of NATO. and serve as the pretext for Russia to expand even further towards the West, bordering then right up against NATO members like Romania that lies on the other side of Moldova. So you see what I'm saying? I think you were right when you said, you know, Putin's ambitions go beyond Ukraine. And his desire to reestablish as much of the old USSR as he can, I think that's what he's up to.
Yeah,
Not
thank
that
you
he
so
can
much.
necessarily. I'm not sure he has the capability to do that, but that's what he wants to do.
Let's get to the capability in a second. Thank you, Claire, very much for so profoundly crystallizing all of these things. You also very powerfully and profoundly talk about another theme in your work, which is very important, and I'm so glad you're doing it, and I think it's a central issue. And in your recent work, you're talking about how Ukraine overall, the people of Ukraine, what's in their hearts, they reject the quote-unquote human rights mean nothing style of rule, as you have referred to this. So on one realm, let's even forget the threat of NATO and all these excuses that Putin and this camp try to use, the strategic things, the natural resources. Then we can talk about this, this version of the biolabs and the Nazis and all that stuff. We can get to all that. We've dealt with these issues on our program. But you are emphasizing that Ukraine overall, the people overall, tilting more to the American Declaration of Independence, of individual freedom, of freedom of speech, of what the West stands for, and Putin, you know, very much saturated with totalitarianism, with denigration of the individual, of the state being more important than the individual, that Putin finds this anathema. So philosophically, the very idea of Ukraine tilting towards Thomas Jefferson is something that drives Putin crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. So
well, I'm giving you props for
for citing all of that, and I think we are in agreement. And the thing is that, you know, the Ukrainian people's identity has been attacked and torn asunder over the centuries by the Lithuanians, by the Poles, by the Nazi Germany, by the Russians, certainly the Holodomor in 1932, 33 and beyond, that murdered, starved to death millions of Ukrainians. But I think right now with this attack, this new attack from the East, from Russia, I think the Ukrainian people's identity is really being forged in blood. Not that it wasn't there before, but this is its real crucible of nationhood. And I'm saying that in a way because part of the excuse that Putin has been using, for example, to go into the Donbass, is that, well, there are ethnic Russian people there, people who are ethnic Russian speakers, Russian language speakers, and we have to liberate them and allow them to become part of Russia. A faint remembrance here of something about Hitler and the Sudetenland, and okay. But when you actually go into the Donbass and into these oblasts of Donetsk and Luhansk, which comprise the Donbass, it seems now from reports, at least that I'm hearing, that even those who are ethnic Russian or Russian speakers, they have forged for themselves, they identify as Ukrainians. Zelensky himself, his first language is Russian. It's not Ukrainian. And often we'll hear him making announcements or even speeches in Russian. Not that he can't
Yeah.
speak Ukrainian, but that was his first language.
And Claire, what you're, sorry to interrupt, but what you're emphasizing right now completely discredits this narrative that somehow Putin is going in there to save the Russian-speaking population from this quote-unquote ethnic cleansing and quote-unquote genocide being perpetrated. That's just a myth, as you're pointing out, right?
Exactly, exactly. But to your broader point, and what really I think Putin and his senior leadership cannot abide is what you said also, and that is what I wrote. Yes, but that Ukraine over these last decades, let's say decade or two, Ukraine has begun to look westward. Okay, it is a completely imperfect nation. Its progress towards Western style liberal democracy is stumbling, it's bumbling, it's flawed, and indeed is one of the reasons why Ukraine does not meet the criteria to be even a member of NATO, not sure about the European Union. But nevertheless, it's looking to the West. It is trying to move closer to those ideals that you know of our own founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and George Washington and so forth. That that mindset of individual liberty, government by consent of the governed, equality before the law for all, that is a danger to Putin's rule, authoritarianism in Russia, not NATO. These ideas.
Absolutely. Thank you, Claire. And the thought comes to us, too, that there's this virus of totalitarianism and how it begins to tremble. And Putin is trembling when the Ukrainian people begin to even suggest that they are interested in freedom. And I think that same virus today, you see it with the people on The View or in the left, you know, at MSNBC. Just the thought of Twitter becoming free again just sends them into ferocious rage, just like Putin with Ukraine. I think that there is an analogy we can make there. We're going to take a very quick break for a word from our sponsors. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I recently got one of Mike Lindell's pillows and comforters at mybillow.com, and I started getting some of the most restful sleeps in my life. And you can do the same. Go to mypillow.com and use code GG21 to get incredible and amazing discounts. Or just call 1-800-854-0673. While you're doing that, you'll know that you're supporting Mike Lindell, a true American hero fighting a true American cause. And you'll also be supporting the Glazov Gang. Thank you. May God bless you, and may God bless America. And we are back with the scholar Clare Lopez discussing Russia and Ukraine. Claire, just before we left, we're talking about the philosophy of freedom in Ukraine that poses as a threat to Putin and his KGB mindset. Let's move over to something else you've been writing about. And you are suggesting that Putin might have badly miscalculated, and he might also have been very badly misinformed. He's not really achieving what he thought he would achieve in Ukraine, is he?
Well, you know, it certainly looks as though the original plan, as far as we can tell, of Putin and his senior military leadership to take Ukraine very quickly in as many as a few days did not work out. We'll recall he aimed first for the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, where it seems that he intended to assassinate the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, even reportedly at least sent or more than one, Chechen hit team to take him out. That did not happen. Decapitate the government of Ukraine, that did not happen. And then those Russian troops around Kiev withdrew, perhaps giving up on taking the capital. moved back towards the east, towards the Donbass. So at least in that respect, it seems that the original plan did not come to pass as expected. Now, whether Putin was misinformed, misled by his own senior military leadership, hard to tell. We do know that over these last 20 years or so that Putin's been in power, he has methodically eliminated anyone who could be a potential threat to himself, his own power, but likewise to also fill in behind, give him good advice, and even one day perhaps be a successor to Putin. So there isn't that bench, if you will, around Putin, and certainly not people who would dare perhaps to give him very bad news or to tell him, no, you are not going to be able to roll over Ukraine as easily as you think. Recall, of course, that the Ukrainian military forces have been trained in country and elsewhere by NATO forces, including rotating units of American troops ever since 2014. That means 8 years now. No, Vladimir Putin, you are not going to be able to roll over Ukraine as easily as you think. I don't think they were telling him that. Yeah. And now we see shuffling going on at the top ranks. For instance, they brought in this thug who had been known as the butcher of Syria, right? What was his name? Dvornikov, Alexander Dvornikov, and they had him already in the Donbass, but made him promoted him a short time ago, a couple weeks more at the most, to be the commander. Well, it seems that now even that has been superseded, and I'm looking here for the name of the new guy that they have now put in, who is to command the entire effort, at least in the east, I think, and in the south. And I'm not finding his name terribly quickly, but there is a shuffling going on. That's what I mean to say at the top ranks of the Russian military. So we'll see if they readjust, if the mauled brigades that the Ukrainians took apart in the Kiev area and elsewhere can reform, can reintegrate into other units. What they're going to do about that, the Russians, we'll see.
Thank you, Claire. You know, it's always very fascinating in these pathological settings where there's a dictator, where, you know, I often think of Baghdad Bob during Iraq, the Iraq War, but Putin's got the Baghdad Bobs, but even telling him all the quote unquote good news because they're afraid to tell him anything that's truthful. So this is the advantage that freedom-loving people have over these dictatorships and authoritarian monsters, because they live in a complete illusion and delusion, but that also comes with its scary threats. So this is what I want to get to here. Before I ask if there's a catastrophe for Putin, what he might try to do in terms of nuclear weapons, let me get to that in a sec. But I want to ask this. You know, we think about America involved in, let's say, Afghanistan and Iraq for long periods. In Afghanistan, I mean, what, it was 2 decades? But tragic casualties, tragic deaths, absolutely, of Americans. But in this case, we've got tens of thousands, I think, of Russian troops already that have died. How does it happen that the Russians suffer more deaths of their soldiers in a couple weeks than the Americans have suffered, let's say, in Afghanistan in 2 decades? Why so many casualties? They say it's, and I think you've also pointed out, it might even be 1/3 of Russia's conventional army. That's crazy.
It is crazy. And I've already mentioned the training that's been going on by NATO and including American forces, of Ukrainians over the last 8 years or so, taught them something important. First of all, to instruct them in combined arms. That would be, the coordination of air forces, ground forces, tanks, artillery, all of that. The Russian army, for some reason, has lost that capability, at least apparently in Ukraine. Another advantage of the Ukrainians is that they have learned, perhaps from the training, how to incorporate non-coms, that is non-commissioned officers, the middle rank, of the enlisted personnel. Who runs an army? It's the senior sergeants who run an army in modern times and in American and Western forces. The commanders are officers, yes, of course, but the actual on the ground, the ones who make the tactical decisions as the battle's going on, those are the sergeants. Well, the Russian army doesn't do that. A Russian, whether officer or non-com, can no more make a decision on his own without referring up the chain of command to a senior colonel, general, then he could, just go off and do whatever he wants. So this stymies, this puts them at a disadvantage, the Russians. But here's the last thing, and perhaps the most important. The Ukrainians are fighting for their land, for their people, for their country. That's motivation that the Russian conscripts do not have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Claire, the sinking of the Moskva ship, how did that happen? How significant is it? I think a huge strategic loss for Putin, but symbolically, I think also very devastating, right?
Absolutely. So Moskva, of course, is the name of the capital of Russia. It is Moscow in Russian, I guess in Ukrainian too, Moskva. And it was the flagship of the Russian naval forces besieging Ukraine's southern coast, which lying along the Sea of Azov and then further past the Kerch Straits into the Black Sea is what Russia is trying to take over in order to make Ukraine landlocked. That's the objective in the south there. But what appears to have been happening is that the Ukrainians have been supplied with coastal defense weaponry. And that means shore-to-ship missile capability. And it seems that a couple of missiles, I don't know, maybe harpoons, were what struck the Moskva, eventually leading to its sinking. Although I think the crew managed to be rescued. I think the Turks helped with that. But in any case, a symbolic defeat for the Russian Navy, to be sure, but also putting the Russian Navy on notice that the Ukrainians now have coastal defense weapons and are receiving more, because that's where the battle is now, as we've talked about, moving along that southern area, Sea of Azov, Black Sea, in an effort to go then link up west and north into the Transnistria and Moldovan area. That seems to be the approach right now. But that the Ukrainians now have coastal defense weaponry, that has got to put the Russians on notice and hopefully give them some pause.
Claire, let's say Putin begins to really lose and he faces a catastrophic situation. This is not the most moral Christian man out there that spends his nights tossing and turning, worrying about how many people are dying, including his own people. You think that this guy might push a button, nuclear or let's say biological or chemical weapons of some kind?
Well, we've heard a pretty steady stream of threats of use of nuclear weapons coming from top officials of the Russian military and government. Sergei Lavrov, for example, the foreign minister. And we know that Russia has a very large arsenal of tactical nuclear weapons, something that the Americans, we decided just not to produce a long time ago. So we don't even have those. But something like that, I think, is a possibility if Putin reaches a point of frustration and just, anger at his military's inability to achieve the objectives that he wants. There were reports a couple of weeks ago that down near Mariupol or in Mariupol, that perhaps some kind of chemical agent had been used. We know, for example, that in Syrian battlefields, the Russian forces absolutely resorted to the use of chemical weapons, sarin, nerve gas in that case. So certainly there's precedent, and I don't put it past Putin and his regime to resort to that if frustrated enough.
Yeah, Claire, I'm sometimes just so baffled just by the naivete of the West on many levels. Like even on Fox News, there's some commentators on there. They're like, Putin's really not doing well because the Russian people are getting very upset, or there's, Russians dying in this war. Like, Putin doesn't care about what Russians think. Putin doesn't care that Russian boys and men and girls and whoever, anywhere, die. This guy's a monster. And he's very capable of doing the things that you were just saying. Claire, you also write very wisely about China sitting on the sidelines licking its chops. And I see something there. It's so hard to tell what's going on. There's so much smoke and mirrors. We know that the fix is in on many levels in terms of how much power the globalists have. At the same time, they can't control everything. They couldn't stop Trump from getting in, that's for sure, but they did succeed in getting rid of him, although I think not in the most honest ways. But something I feel is going on here as well. Ukraine bleeding, Russia bleeding in its own way, and then some kind of vacuum's going to happen. And there appears to be that China might very well fill this vacuum on some levels. What do you think?
Well, certainly Russia and China are partners. We know that in early February of this year, 2022, that Putin and Xi Jinping signed a mutual agreement pledging essentially unrestricted support for each other. And we also know that prior to the February 24th invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that China, at least reportedly, launched a very devastating, severe cyber attack against Ukraine. So there is a partnership there. But over the last many decades, since Mao Zedong took over China in 1949, let's say, the roles have flipped, I think. Whereas previously Russia was elder brother, if you will, and China was younger brother. And China got its technology, its military hardware and equipment from the Soviet Union. That's no longer the case. China has better, more advanced, more modern military equipment now, and more of it than Russia does. I think China is also looking at whether Russia and Putin can even be an asset as a partner to China. Certainly after this, Russia is an international pariah. Putin is a war criminal. His generals, his top people are war criminals being taken to the International Court at The Hague in the Netherlands on war crimes charges. So we have not seen an all-out, very open Chinese support, diplomatically or otherwise, of Russia and Putin during this invasion. Now, what's going on behind the scenes, maybe not so easy to tell, but certainly certain calculations are being made with regard to China's objective of taking over Taiwan. Now, Ukraine has proven itself to be maybe just a little bit more than Russia can digest, a bit off a little more than it can chew. China's thinking about that with regard to Taiwan. Now is the time when we who are supporters of Taiwan, now is the time when we should be helping to arm and train and get Taiwan ready to be that indigestible bite that China will hesitate to attack. So I think
Claire,
those are some of the lessons that come to mind for me.
thank you so much, Claire. We just have a little bit of time left. Each of my questions coming up deserve 30-minute or 30-hour answers, but in this case, I'm going to have to ask you just 30 seconds because we got to go, but I really want to touch on this. Do you think Putin would have invaded Ukraine if Trump was in office?
Absolutely not. I don't need 30 seconds for that.
Okay, 30 seconds. Why?
Because Trump projected assertiveness. He projected an America First national security policy. He let Putin know that he was no pushover. Nothing happened during the 4 years of the Trump administration. Remember, during the prior administrations, Putin had grabbed for Crimea, had grabbed and begun hostilities in the Donbass. Under Trump, none of that.
Absolutely.
Putin knew who Trump was and knew that he did not stand a chance of going up against Donald J. Trump. And so it was quiet for 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Trevor Loudon, with all the evidence that he has looked at and researched, sees Biden as a Chinese, Russian stooge, puppet. We can use some other words, but definitely Biden is in the leftist camp. It's very blurry to what extent he's a complete and utter moron, but we also know that the left has malice in its heart. And when we look at what just happened in Afghanistan with Biden, it's very difficult not to conclude that there wasn't malice there. At the very least, Biden is heavily compromised when it comes to China and Russia, right?
That's certainly true. But even more so than that, he and those around him, many of whom are retreads from the Obama years, the Obama administration, they are perceived by our adversaries and friends and allies and partners alike as weak. And that perception of weakness is an open invitation to aggression every time.
Absolutely. And in all my years of studying the left, I come to the conclusion that this is not incompetence. The left is in power and it roots for the other side, it aids and abets the other side. And I think that that's what's happening today with Biden in the White House. Claire, you are such a great person. There's so many people on the edge of their seat right now thinking, oh, I want to follow Clare Lopez. Where do they go?
Well, unfortunately, I do not have a website yet, but I am on social media at Clare M. Lopez on Twitter. My name also the same on Facebook, Lopez Liberty on Telegram. And I just managed to get onto Truth Social this past couple of days or so. And there it's at Klercho. Klercho is my Slavic nickname. I publish my videos and writing at places like the Citizens Commission on National Security, the United West, at Brannon Houses, Worldview Report and Weekend. And also I am now a senior advisory board member for Sargis Sangari's Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. And of course, at the Glazov Gang, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you for being such a noble truth teller and for shining a light in the darkness in our world today, Claire. We wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we will see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.